Peace talks with the Taliban are dead. President Trump saying he won't go forward after canceling a secret summit at Camp David with the terror group to end the Afghanistan war. Trump pulling the plug after Taliban leaders claimed responsibility for an attack that killed a U.S. soldier and 11 others. The Taliban responding to the president's move by threatening more Americans will die as a result. Reaction is pouring in from both sides of the political aisle. Watch.
It's just another example of the president treating foreign policy like it's some kind of game show.
Donald Trump is not afraid to walk away from a bad deal.
This is the worst president when it comes to negotiating. It's more of his erratic behavior that people are tired of.
I think the president was right to cancel the meeting. I think what he's trying to do is fulfill a campaign promise.
For the U.S. to meet with the Taliban and not have the leader of Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban is something that's doomed to failure.
While speaking with reporters, President Trump calling off future talks with the Taliban and is defending trying to hold them in the first place.
As far as I'm concerned, they're dead. They thought that they had to kill people in order to put themselves in a little better negotiating position. You can't do that. You can't do that with me. So they're dead as far as I'm concerned. I like the idea of meeting. I've met with a lot of bad people and a lot of good people during the course of the last almost 3 years. And I think meeting is a great thing. I think that meeting with, you know, you're talking about war. There are meetings with war. Otherwise, wars would never end. You'd have them go on forever. We had a meeting scheduled. It was my idea, and it was my idea to terminate it.
As he is the decider, Brian, the Taliban was set up for an incredible propaganda opportunity at Camp David, and they blow it. So their arrogance might have done them in, but maybe that's good.
A couple of things. I mean, the attacks were happening on a pretty steady basis, and according to the State Department, we were attacking them pretty much, too. And we killed about 1,000 people over the last month, they said, of Taliban because they were getting a little bit belligerent. But the way the president wanted to have it, the reports were, he goes, I wanted to meet with the Taliban, then I wanted to meet with the sitting government. They wanted to go and have a ceremony, say, hey, look what I did, here's the ceremony. He said, the president said, no, I don't want a celebration. What I want to do is get this thing across the goal line. I want to look these guys in the eye and see if they're serious about taking the next step. It was his idea to choose Camp David. It was Khalilzad's idea to bring him to Washington. It was Pompeo and Khalilzad who put together the 9 rounds of talks. But ultimately, I think the president made the right decision. They're not ready to talk peace. They were high-fiving as if they already were successful. They were saying we slayed another superpower. That was the talk in between sessions. And clearly they didn't. Right.
And, Jesse, there were two narratives, right? So the United States is trying to say we need this out of a political necessity. This war's gone on too long. We need to figure out a way to extricate ourselves in a way that doesn't hurt our national security, and we think this is the way forward. And the Taliban was basically saying we have run off the United States of America, and aren't we great? And now those two things were never going to be able to remain without colliding at some point.
I don't like the symbolism of the Taliban coming to Camp David. It's hallowed ground for American diplomacy and the American presidency. These people are barbaric. They make Kim Jong-un look refined. Let's remember, Kim Jong-un, barbarian too, but he has his henchmen do his dirty work for him. The Taliban personally stone women. They personally commit atrocities. They personally do horrible, horrible things you can't even say here on television. So to give them that Camp David platform, I think, was a bad idea, and I'm glad the president canceled it. We have had bad guys at Camp David before. We've had Soviet leaders. We've had Yasser Arafat, but not to this level. I understand the president wanting to withdraw from Afghanistan. All powers eventually fight there, and then they leave. We just want to leave on our own terms, and I believe his generals and his strategists were trying to lock those terms in so they could leave with some sense of accomplishment, but also not just leave Afghanistan for terrorists to reconstitute themselves and launch attacks here. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a long process, and we need to do something to end this war and spend the tens of billions of dollars that we're spending there, have it spent here.
Well, one of the things, Juan, is that the Taliban had just recently refused to acknowledge that al-Qaeda was responsible for 9/11. It was like within the last 3 weeks.
Well, you know, it's incredible. We haven't said it, but I mean, this week is the
anniversary.
Mark. We as Americans will mark another, I think it's now, 18 years since 9/11. And the idea that the president would invite these people who were the hosts for the terrorists who attacked this al-Qaeda to come to this country, I find incredible. I don't think that was Pompeo. I don't think that was Khalid.
It was the president.
It was the president. That's what I think.
Pompeo said it was his idea.
No, I think you're saying, hey, wait, there are other people here who are putting things together. I think he's the guy who's the president. He's the man who the buck stops with him, and he approved of this idea, which I find just incredible.
Well, it's like when Obama wanted to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed here in Manhattan. There was a huge outrage against that. I think people also understand this was not the right time.
No, I don't think. Look, I just think there's a huge difference between saying we're going to put someone on trial for an atrocity versus what we saw here, which is bring them in, have them at Camp David, give them added credibility, treat them like
I agree. I don't think it was the right place to do it.
Right. So I just think that was crazy. But I will say this. I think polls show the American people want this over, want us to get out. I think Trump has the right instinct there. But when you stop and think about the idea that you are giving credibility to people who are terrorists and they don't even have a deal with the government in Kabul, their own government, and we saw what happened when the Soviets pulled out. It just led to chaos and more fractionalization and more terrorists taking root there. I think we were going at it in the wrong way. One final point, Dana. How can we invite these guys when we're saying to the people who are fleeing the Bahamas and the devastation, oh, you can't come in here? That's an outrage.
Well, I think those are two. I mean, we could talk. Those are two very different things. But I did want to ask Dagan about the investment and the return on investment that we have achieved over the last 18 years. The ability for women and children to be freer, to be able to go to school, to not be afraid for their lives, even though that's not true across the board, and also to be able to prevent al-Qaeda from being able to attack us from there. That investment has paid off somewhat.
Right, and President Trump is cornered in the same way that even President Obama was, that if you pull out of Afghanistan, you expose potentially the U.S. to another major terrorist attack. The Wall Street Journal editorial page writes about this very thing. Hard as it may be to accept, the fight against Islamic terrorism will be a multi-generational struggle around the world. Better to stay on offense on their turf than to retreat to playing defense on America's. Far better to have Muslim allies fighting by our side in their countries than to play preemptive and reprisal attacks from the air and far away. The Clinton years showed us that pinprick missile attacks alone do not stop al-Qaeda. But to Jesse's point about Camp David, people hear Taliban at Camp David, those 4 words, and I know a lot of Americans probably went, oh, hell no. And the point is, it's not happening.
It's not happening. ISIS also in Afghanistan that we know of, and the Haqqani network.
We can't leave. You have to understand, all the president has to do is say, I'm going to draw down, but I can't pull out because I saw what happened in Iraq. And if you read General Mattis's book, he said, I didn't want to make this a political book. I finished it in 2017. Then I got asked to become Secretary of Defense. But he said, they told Vice President Biden and his dignitaries, if you pull out, there's an al-Qaeda group ready to move in, and they pulled out anyway.
Right.
So if the president pulls out, he's not saying, I want to dominate a country. He's not saying, I want to teach them democracy. The president says, I'm going to keep 8,500 or 10,000 in there to give us an idea of what's happening on the ground with ISIS, al-Qaeda, and all the terrorist activities that are going across the Pakistani-Afghan border. If you want to talk about how to better spend the money that we're writing to the government, absolutely. If you want to get more allies involved, absolutely. But the president just explained, this isn't about standing up Afghanistan. It's about a spyglass into the terror networks that are existing and thriving there, and we get countless benefits, unending benefits from being there and understanding how they operate.
That's an important point, is that you're leaving a counter-terror group in there to launch operations and then also gain intelligence, but also maybe leave some smart people that it can enterprise some of the vast mineral wealth in Afghanistan. So maybe we could get paid back for all of the work that we've been doing.
Well, you know, it's been 18 years. 18 years we've been there.
And how many major attacks have we had here, Juan?
Hang on. 18 years, 3 presidents. I think we've got 2,300 Americans dead, 3,500 if you include the Allied forces. So I think it's time for us to think about how we handle this, because we're not there to last forever.
I know that these are 2 different things, but we've had troops in Europe since the end of World War II, and we've had troops in Korea since the armistice in 1953. Those are 2 different situations.
And we're in a generational struggle.
But again, we don't call those forever wars.